Right now we're going to continue on to talk about Albert Bandura. And if we can bring up the slide that I managed to lose in the last class. Triadic reciprocal determinism was an important concept to Albert Bandura. And as you can see, he says that cognitive and other personal factors, behavior, and environmental influences all operate interactively as determinants of one another. And you want to keep in mind that if you focus on only one of these, then often you will not be able to predict well what a person would do. On the other hand, when you look carefully at what we've got in this definition, you begin to recognize you have to have a lot of information about someone in order to predict how they might operate in a certain setting. So this interdependence of personal factors, behavior, and environmental influences creates a real complexity in life, and that's appropriate because, life is complex. People are complex. But as soon as you get into a theory like this, you run into lots of problems. Now, you can kind of see this interdependence in a way, if you just observe the social scene. For example, in present times, people seem to enjoy violent movies. And we say this because large numbers of people go to violent movies. And movies advertise themselves as being violent. So there seems to be a personal preference that people have that they actually act out in their behavior. At the same time, movie makers are making a lot more violent movies. So the result is that the environment now offers people more opportunities to see violent movies, and people seem to want more violent movies, so you have a real interaction between what people want and what the environment produces. Now, these violent movies, though, are not in vogue by accident. At the same time, it's the desire of people to see these movies that causes other people to make them. If you didn't have that, we wouldn't have all these violent movies being made. Now, what can happen here? Well, if you think about this, and you may not obviously be in this group, but we're just talking about people in general. If people became more reflective about violence and why they're enjoying it and began realizing maybe this is not such a good thing, then people might begin to change in terms of going to these films. Now, that would mean that people would have to feel strongly enough that they would deny themselves a gratification that they actually might want. That is, they would have to alter their behavior and not attend something that actually they kind of find themselves enjoying. Now, if that were done, then the environment would change. If people actually decided, I am not going to violent movies, and there's a big drop-off in people attending violent movies. If that happened, people will stop making violent movies. So then the environment changes. And, that becomes, a very important kind of thing to understand is that, the environment responds to us, we respond to the environment, and the question becomes, which is actually, creating more of the impact. Now, I imagine we have some moviegoers out here. Do you think that violent movies are increasing, decreasing, or staying about the same?
Same.
I hear most people are saying increasing. Is that? Well, what does that say to you then? Now, if violent movies are increasing, if you think that, what's that say? People like violent movies. Yes. And now, but what also does that tell us about, our society? Why do you think people would like violent movies?
Escapism.
Pardon?
our society right now is in a violent time because of the war and that kind of thing. So going to a movie takes you away from what you're actually experiencing.
Okay, so you're saying going to a violent movie may be a form of escapism from a violence that's troubling. Okay, that's certainly one possibility. Why else might there?
Because it's something that you don't see daily, so it's pretty exciting to see, kind of gets your adrenaline going. You don't see that daily. You don't see it.
Okay, so the movies present to you something that you don't experience in your everyday life. Okay, and you were saying it can get your adrenaline going. It can be exciting. So violence can be exciting. All right. What else? Society wants
accepting like more violent movies.
Okay. Society is accepting more violent movies. Okay. So you're saying there's an increase in the amount of violence that is in these movies, and society can allow that because society is more accepting of violence at this point. Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, that's all right. Yes.
I go to see violent movies. The plot is good. Like, it's a movie I want to see, and maybe it's a little too violent, like it was like too much blood or something like that. But the plot was good, so that's why I went to see it. You know.
Okay. Now you notice, and I'm putting myself in this category also. You know, we're all falling into a stereotype here, aren't we? We're falling into a stereotype that violence is being shown to us, you know, and it's bad. Now, no one has mentioned yet that, what about a violent movie that's good? That is, that its purpose is to change our behavior away from violence. Can you think of any, you know, such film? Sure.
Tears of the Sun is like that. I don't know if anybody's seen that. But it's about those Navy SEALs in Africa, and you know, they stop all the genocide, and you know, they risk their lives to save these people.
Okay,
Like
so
that.
so here's a film that's showing you violence, but pardon? Extreme violence, but its purpose is to bring peace. Okay, so
I was going to say kind of like that, like war movies, any kind of like war, like Saving Private Ryan. You know, the beginning of that was very violent, very visually shocking.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of just the violence that encompasses war.
and what do you hope, like, that movie would do for people?
We don't have war anymore.
Yeah,
I
it would-
realize these young boys are losing arms and just dying horrific deaths.
So here you have the learning you're hoping for is not that people will learn to be more violent, but actually that people will understand the terrible consequences of violence.
Violence between having a mistress.
Okay, what you're teaching? What?
The violence that can occur when a man cheats on a woman.
Oh, okay. for all the men in this class, if you want to recognize the violence that can occur, if you are unfaithful to the person you are involved with, but it's a good point you're making, you know, and that is that in this situation, it's very focused, and Fatal Attraction very much is focused on the violence that can happen to one person. It's very different than say, a war. Well, there's one other violence movie that no one has mentioned, and it just may be that in your age group it may not come up so often. Okay. Pardon?
Pay It Forward. Pay It Forward. It was a movie about a kid starting this trend where he helps 3 people and then those 3 people help 3 other people. But in the end, he still dies.
Oh, okay. So I'm not sure. I didn't see it. But there's violence in that.
Yeah.
The kids. Okay. All right. The one I was thinking about is the movies that have been about the Holocaust. I mean, probably the most horrific event perhaps in history. And when violence is shown in Holocaust movies, it's clearly not to get you in touch to think that violence might be enjoyable or that violence might be fun, but rather that, hopefully you would never want to see such violence again. Now, I'm saying that, and none of us picked up on that, and there's a good reason, because we don't see many movies where the showing of violence actually is done to make us aware of the fact that violence can be terrible, that there are historic lessons to be learned, that we would want to be sensitive and know about these things so we would not do them again. As you mentioned about Saving Private Ryan, another example. I mean, of seeing real war. We're seeing it now, even, of course, as having been at war recently. People lose sight of the fact that real people die in wars. And so often, war movies have been shown as a way of trying to sensitize people to the fact that this is not what you want to engage in. Most of the violent movies today are not like that, as you know. Most of the violent movies are cops and robbers. They're about drug barons. They're about people who make an enormous amount of money off of illegal activity, and they engage in a lot of violence. And now, of course, there's the whole genre of kung fu kinds of movies where everybody can identify with the guy who's got the great skills. And there, you constantly have this theme where the weaker person overcomes the seemingly stronger person because the person has learned these skills in fighting. Well, the important thing in this is that people like Bandura became very interested in studying social phenomena and in studying the fact that it's our interaction with the environment that has an impact both on the environment and on ourselves, that they play back and forth. Now, Bandura also placed considerable emphasis on cognitive variables. And he believed that we use both verbal representations and imaginal representations to guide our behavior. And he said, we do this by considering problems that we anticipate, and then we examine possible solutions. Thus, if we foresee negative consequences in something we might do, we avoid it without having to experience the negative consequences for us to know that something is bad. For example, you don't have to have the experience to know that you really don't want to walk down a dark alley in a so-called bad neighborhood at night. There are some things you have not experienced that, perhaps. Hopefully, none of you have experienced being mugged, but all of you have an awareness. You can anticipate certain things that you didn't experience and know that you are going to increase the likelihood of a bad experience if you were to do something. Now, Bandura also, by the way, had an interesting time concept. In strict reinforcement theory, it is important that the reinforcement come quickly after the response. However, Bandura posited that actually, reinforcements can sometimes come considerably later than the response, and that humans are still very much influenced by such results. He also posited that we are motivated by anticipated outcomes. Can we put this up? Okay, let's see. Okay. For example, if we decide to go skiing, let's say in the Rockies, let's say we've never been skiing. Let's say you've never been outside Texas. Even then, you don't wait till you get on a mountainside in order to buy a warm jacket so that you're not going to freeze while you're out skiing. So you may not have experienced cold, certainly may not have experienced snow. You may not have experienced much of what skiing is like at all. It's your first time skiing. But it's amazing how much you anticipate. It's amazing how much you anticipate and how that governs your behavior. Then, so the idea that you're going to be rewarded by buying that jacket is something that that you do, but it's not because you really had that experience, and it's not going to happen tomorrow. But those are behaviors we engage in, and actually we can even predict those things about someone who is going to go skiing. Now, Bandura also posited that actually, you can change without any external reinforcement. He noted that we learn much simply by watching others, especially when we watch people that either we highly value or people that we believe are charismatic. Thus, we may develop a behavior through what he called observational learning. He regarded this observational learning as very necessary for effective functioning in our society. For example, and some of these are so obvious to us, but other theorists have not pointed them out to us. But we don't have to get hit by a car to know how to safely cross the street. I mean, people don't just randomly cross the street because since they've never been hit by a car, they're not worried about it. Actually, we pay a lot of attention to crossing the street because we have observed other people who have not paid attention, and that's plenty for us. Now, Bandura also was quite taken, actually, by modeling theory. And he developed, what I think we would acknowledge is a reasonably complex theory about it, or a reasonably complex approach to it. He noted that on the surface, the process seemed simple, but he felt there were a number of factors that actually determined whether modeling would work or not. First, he noted the personality characteristics of the observer play a prominent role in modeling. For instance, if the model that we're looking at is dancing, and the observer is attracted to dancing, the person is much more likely to imitate the behavior than, let's say, if the person is awkward and the person is frightened of dancing. In the latter, actually, seeing someone really being a good dancer may cause someone to have almost no desire, maybe no desire to dance because they feel they don't have an ability. So modeling can either be a positive force in which you see some event, you see something going on, and you say, I want to do that. Or it can be that having seen this and having evaluated that I could never do this, you avoid doing it. Now, added then to the personality characteristics of the observer are the characteristics of the model. And people tend to respond more positively to competent models who are somewhat similar to the observer than to untalented models who are quite different. And rewards and punishments that are associated with the model's behavior can affect the initiative of the observers. So if we see that someone is regularly rewarded for their behavior, we're obviously much more likely to imitate it. I mean, if someone does something and everybody is responding well to it, we're going to have an internal desire, I would like to do that. The experience of taking on new behaviors, because we have observed others doing these behaviors and being rewarded, is called vicarious reinforcement. Okay. I don't know when you were in grade school, I just think of this as a good example. I don't know if when you were in grade school, if the teacher rewarded students who would erase the blackboard. you may not have had blackboards. But when I was in school, we had blackboards and chalk. One of the interesting things that happens to little kids, and you'll see this, is that some kid recognizes that the teacher really likes the idea that the kid cleans the blackboard. So the kid cleans it. Now, that often happens like even in first grade. It doesn't take long till there's another sharp kid who recognizes, boy, you know, when so-and-so cleans the blackboard, the teacher really likes that. So the other kid starts doing it. And if you watch this in a classroom, you'll see this. You'll see one kid races up here, one kid races up here, each of them cleans half the blackboard. Well, then another kid recognizes this. And so you may get 3 or 4 kids up erasing the blackboard, totally unneeded, and creates a dilemma for the teacher. Because what happens sometimes then is, since the underlying reason for doing this, of course, is to get the teacher's attention, but the teacher's not paying much attention, now the 4 kids are doing it, sometimes the kids get into a fight. And they try to convince, you know, the first kid tries to convince people, this is my territory. I was the first one to erase the board, therefore I should get the rewards. The 4th kid in is feeling, you may think that, but now that I recognize that that's the game here, I'm getting into the game. So you want to be aware that when you're looking at models, that models, you know, produce certain kinds of behaviors. And highly desired rewards that come cause more and more people to behave this way. Now, Bandura actually had a particular interest in modeling and aggression. And he was especially interested in applying modeling principles in research to the problems of violence in the media and the harmful effects that he thought television had on its viewers. Now, this area, by the way, this has been highly researched in psychology. I mean, psychology has done all kinds of studies on the effects of violence on television and how they affect children. Now, some people hold that observing violence on television is not detrimental, that actually, you know, people can make that distinction. All the research says that is not true, that the research says that constant watching of television can have real effects. And seeing violence on television can especially have effects on children. Now, this is an interesting issue here because there were a series of studies where the thesis was very psychoanalytic, and it was that if you could vicariously experience aggression, that is, you would get out, you know, your aggressive feelings, then you wouldn't act on those impulses. So that if you watched a lot of violence, you would be less likely to be violent. Of course, the study showed that this is absolutely untrue. That if you engage vicariously in violence, you're actually more likely to get violent. It's also true if you actually are directly involved in violence. There was a study done on hockey players. And the hypothesis was that hockey players will get into more fights in the off-season than they will during the season. Because since they're fighting all the time playing hockey, that will kind of satisfy that aggressiveness in them, so they won't get into fights during the season. But when they're not in the season, and many of these people seem to be violent people anyway, they'll get into more fights. They found out the opposite was true. They found out that these people being regularly in fights at nights and playing their hockey games actually engaged in more fights off the ice during the season than they did at any other time. So that immediate sense of either being violent yourself may well cause you to be more violent, or if you simply see violence modeled a lot, you are more likely to engage in violence. Now, no one really holds, by the way, a direct cause or link between television violence and actual violence in our society. But many investigators have very carefully studied this, and they've demonstrated that under certain conditions, people are likely to act aggressively if they have experienced that the aggression is rewarded. And that becomes one of the keys in children's television. Is the aggressor in the show being rewarded? Now, there are other kinds of things, by the way, in terms of modeling. I was thinking about, how television covers things. There was a time when, at live sports events, television would cover everything. And so there was a period where people would run naked onto the field. And cameras would pan on the person, and they would follow the person running around. And then you'd see the police. It was really a humorous situation sometimes. The police would be chasing the person. And finally, they would tackle the person, and then they would wrap one of the policemen's coats around the person, and then they would carry the person off. Well, and this went on at sporting events for some time, until somebody pointed out that the reason the person jumps out of the stands and races across the field naked is because they want to be on television. So what would happen if television stopped showing this? And for quite a period of time, actually, television stopped showing these kind of events. That is, in the middle of a game, when somebody jumped up and jumped on the field and disrupted it, they did not pan to that. They went to something else, and they didn't show this event. And it was clearly shown that those kind of events went down. That is, the only thing the person got out of it is they got no television time and they got arrested. So they stopped doing it. What is amazing is, it's come back again. I don't know if you've noticed this. There's even a commercial on television now where this guy jumps out and he runs around naked. He's a British guy, and it's at a soccer game. And now that they're showing this again and people are getting attention, there actually have been more incidents recently, at least according to a TV commentator I was listening to, because that's happening. So, there's no question that behavior that is modeled and rewarded in some way is more likely to occur. And we want to really want to keep aware of that. Now, to account then for personality functioning and change, and one of the really nice things about Bandura's theory is Bandura really does believe you can change. So even if you were a very aggressive person, you can get over that. If you're a very shy person, you could get over that. I mean, he really believes there are ways for all of us to grow. And so what he did is he's kind of extended social cognitive theory by postulating a cognitive mechanism that we call self-efficacy. Now, these efficacy expectations are beliefs or conditions on the part of the person that they can produce certain outcomes or effects. That is, that one believes I can make a difference. Now, well-adjusted people have realistic efficacy expectations, and so the factors really can appropriately guide their actions. That is, if you're a healthy person, your expectations are within certain boundaries. But abnormal people have acquired either low or unrealistic expectations, and these adversely influence them. The low side means they probably don't do much, they don't take advantage of learning. And on the high side, they aspire to things they have no hope of being able to do. So depending on how well you know yourself, efficacy expectations can either be very good or they can be really detrimental. Now, to add to the dilemma then, that these can go both ways, Bandura points out that the accuracy of one's judgment regarding self-efficacy will determine how much effort a person expends on various activities, as well as how long a person will persist on challenging tasks. And he said, and this is especially true if there is adversity. What he observed with abnormal people was that such individuals, anticipating failure, make little effort. And often people like that give up very easily. As a result, their failure actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, their self-efficacy is such they don't think they can do it. They don't try very hard. They don't do it. Turns out they can't do it. Now, added to this is the fact, or added to this failure that people have, is the fact that due to less effort and perseverance, it's really unlikely the person will ever overcome the obstacles that they face. And so they won't realize that they have more control of their life than they anticipated. Now, in discussing this topic, Bandura noted that the acquisition of high or low efficacy expectations is actually very complex. And it has 4 major sources. It has performance accomplishments, vicarious experiences, verbal persuasion, and states of physiological arousal, all of which I will put up in a second. Do not panic. And so the first one, performance accomplishments. Essentially, Bandura believed that efficacy expectations grow primarily from experiences with personal mastery. Thus, it is important that a child have realistic expectations and then experience positive reinforcement. So this starts early in life if you're really going to develop appropriate efficacy expectations. Now, you can imagine, for instance, a child who rides a tricycle. And let's say the child has developed, pretty good mastery in riding a tricycle. Now, if that same youngster is put on a two-wheeler before he or she is ready, and they fail, they then begin to feel inadequate. They believe they don't have the ability to move on to the next stage, which is you move from your tricycle to riding your bicycle. And so if they become really frightened, they fail to develop the new skills, and they get fixated at that stage. Now, Bandura, because he really was optimistic, believed that people could overcome even these negative experiences if they received careful attention. That is, the parents have to recognize that this child has just moved from a phase of having realistic efficacy expectations to now being thwarted. So he said by coaching and assisting a person to attempt some feared experience, the individual can gradually rehearse it mentally. As if you coach the person, you tell them they can do it, they can begin to imagine doing it. And then you have to help them to try it physically and to do it in small doses. And eventually people realize they can do something that originally they thought they could not do. It's a terribly important kind of learning for children, especially when children fail at some task that it's important that they be able to do. Now next, we have vicarious experiences. Now, while actual performance is the strongest form of developing efficacy expectations, Bandura noted we actually can also learn simply by watching other people. Most importantly, he said, we need to observe models who perform well and who are involved in activities that are realistic for us. And he noted that if we observe models who fail in certain activities, we can vicariously develop a sense that we would be unable to do something when actually we might be able to do it. So this modeling works both ways. If you see somebody doing something and it's within your ability, you can learn from them and you can develop some expertise. I can tell you of a situation I know of where a person two young people go golfing. Both are very good athletes. One person, and this is their first time out, one person hits the ball very well, hits the ball straight down the fairway, everything, person seems to have a good swing. The other person hits the ball 2 fairways over, has big slice, doesn't do well, and they play for a period of time. They go around, they play 18 holes. The first person actually plays very well, never played golf before, seems to have a natural talent. The other person doesn't. Later in life, the first person actually is a champion golfer, has done very, very well, won college scholarships, etc. The other person never plays again. Now, in later life, the other person begins to recognize, had I gone golfing with somebody who wasn't a superstar from day one, I might have persevered in this activity. But because I saw this person and their performance, which was so beyond the second person's performance, the second person gives up on an activity. So modeling, is an intricate kind of behavior, and there's chance sometimes to it. You need to see models who are doing things that you probably can do, and they need to be successful at it. They need to be getting rewarded, and that can be a real driving force for you then to move on and try to do that. Unfortunately, if you look at the wrong models and you overshoot because you think you have to perform at a very high level when that's unrealistic, you may actually not do things. You may actually not attempt to achieve some things in your life that you really could achieve. You would just have to put more energy into it. Now next then, there's verbal persuasion. And what Bandura said is, the idea of telling somebody they really can't accomplish a goal can be quite positively reinforcing. The key is encouraging people to do things that they are capable of and encouraging them to do things in a sequence that moves from easy to harder. And this type of verbal persuasion can be very effective. Some parents do this wonderfully with their children. They encourage the child. Well, if you start, really early in life, just teaching the child to walk, you don't want to teach the child that they have to do anything more than take one step in the beginning. That is, you want to be sure that whatever the person does, you reward. There's a reward that's immediate. But a lot of encouragement can be terribly important to all of us. Now, obviously, people make mistakes in the sense that we sometimes encourage people to do things that they're not capable of. And so then verbal persuasion really loses its effect. In fact, someone will stop listening to you if you're constantly kind of trying to push them to be something they can't be. And in parenting, we see these examples all the time, of parents who are pushing the child to try to do something that child cannot do. And of course, what happens then is the child stops listening, makes the parent angrier. The child even becomes oppositional or maybe obstinate and angry, makes the parent even angrier. And the parent never recognizes that all of this comes from the fact that they are trying to persuade their child that they can gain a reinforcement that the child actually can't gain. And so the child's behavior in not trying it is not because the kid is obstinate, but rather it's a way that the child is protecting their self-concept. Since I can't do it, I have to avoid trying it. Now, there's also a negative kind of verbal persuasion that we call criticism. And it can create an anticipation in people that they have very little ability. So people might then set very low efficacy expectations so as not to disappoint or to hurt other people. This is really why we try to over-control kids. And when we do, it's harmful. If you tell a child, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, because we're just getting tired. We don't want the kid running all over the place. We don't want the kid trying out all kinds of new things because we've had a tiring day. We want the kid to stay in one place. Actually, that kind of negative reinforcement can cause the child to think that these are bad things. The child is not going to recognize you're giving these negative statements because you're tired. They think you're giving it because the child shouldn't do it. So in these cases, this kind of negative feedback can limit people. Now, luckily, by the way, that's amongst the least effective, kind of learning. That is, negative statements to someone usually don't have a lot of impact. But if they have impact on anyone, it probably happens more in young children. Now we have emotional arousal. Here we have, tasks that generate high states of tension and stress, often cause people to wish to avoid them. We all know that. In addition, high states of stress can often make a person less efficient. So if you're doing something under a lot of stress, you may fail when actually, if you were doing it with less stress, you might do it well. So what we have found is that very high emotional arousal is correlated with poor performance. And of course, anything that's correlated with poor performance means you'll end up with low efficacy expectations. On the other hand, if a person can perform an act feeling peaceful, feeling energized, feeling happy, it's far more likely they will develop higher efficacy expectations, and also that they'll eagerly pursue them. That is, that it will be fun to do certain things. Now, in terms of assessment techniques, Bandura does not gain much information from things like, he doesn't use dream analysis, he doesn't use free association, he didn't care about transference or any of the techniques that we have kind of identified, with either psychoanalysis or with client-centered therapy. He also doesn't use personality questionnaires as assessment devices. Rather, he relies heavily on client information and actual observations of people in vivo. That is, his way of learning about people was really to ask them about themselves and then to study people in natural settings. And his theory about the various factors we've talked about really evolved from that kind of observation. His basic position is that he needs to see what a person is doing in real life so he can alter those events and attempt to find a system that will allow the person to respond more appropriately and with less stress. That was his idea of doing counseling or psychotherapy, is he really wanted to see what's the person doing that's causing them this difficulty, and then he can begin to develop a plan that would help them to address this more appropriately. Now, the therapeutic models that really have developed from Bandura's theory are limited. Bandura really did not have a big impact on the clinical world. On the other hand, some of the things he developed are helpful to certain subgroups. For example, his modeling technique has shown that you can be effective in helping autistic children overcome certain language difficulties. By trying to help the child to hear the word, to speak the word, to listen to someone else, to try it again, giving them a lot of reinforcement. This has actually worked with certain kids. It's very limited, but it has helped some. His techniques have also been used to help children overcome a number of fears, such as phobias for animals. And in fact, Bandura put a lot of energy into studying phobias. The problem that occurs is that he put a lot of his energy into trying to show experimentally that it is possible to overcome phobias by studying snake phobias. And so Bandura would come into a class like this and he would say, how many of you are frightened of snakes? And now, my guess is, if we said, how many of you are frightened of rattlesnakes, most hands would go up. And so he would get people to volunteer, and then he would try to determine how frightened are you really. And so he would determine that those people who are the most frightened, he would then begin to work with to help them to overcome this phobia. Now, the problem with what Bandura did is that most of us don't care if we're frightened of snakes. Many of us would think it's a smart phobia. That is, I don't know that becoming not phobic for snakes is really going to make a big difference in my life. And in fact, it may make a negative difference in my life. I may be foolish and be around snakes when I shouldn't be. So, and this, sometimes is the criticism, appropriate criticism we have to make of psychologists and academia, is that in order to demonstrate something that really is very important, like how you would overcome a phobia, they take a problem that isn't that important to people. And so they show how, like, this phobia can be overcome, but demonstrating people can overcome a snake phobia is not nearly as meaningful as, let's say, helping people to overcome a phobia for being in a crowd, let's say, or giving a talk. I mean, those are much more real experiences in life that people genuinely want to overcome and that people would like to have some assistance with. Now, there is a promising area, by the way, though, for treatment in Bandura's theory. One of the things that he showed, see, in trying to treat phobias, what he, would do, it's some, like for children, for example, with little animals. If children were frightened of small animals, let's say like a little rabbit, what he would do is he would, show the rabbit like in a cage, and the cage would be way on the other side of the room. The child would be on this side of the room. Eventually, have the child like take a step into the room, maybe take another step towards the cage, and another step, and another step. Eventually, the child would be able to get comfortable enough to be by the cage. And maybe then the child would become comfortable enough to reach into the cage and pet the animal. And then the child might become comfortable enough that you could let the animal run around in the room. And eventually the child might pick the rabbit up and find that this is rewarding, find that this is not scary. And so we would say, well, now the child has overcome this problem. Now, the necessary and important things about this is that the child overcame this phobia by getting a little step closer, a little step closer, a little step closer. In other words, many small behavioral events occurred to help this child to not be phobic for this rabbit. Now, we know with seriously mentally ill people that they have great difficulty when they leave the hospital in adjusting in society, especially people who are what we think of as being chronically mentally ill. That is people who, it takes enormous energy on their part to function in society. They fail often, become psychotic, return to the hospital. And one of the things we know about them is that one of the reasons why they fail is they don't have social support. So if we can teach people to trust other people little by little, so that when we take someone out of the hospital, for example, and we know this now, you put them in a halfway house. And then in the halfway house, you create a way for them to earn some money that allows them to be more independent. And you surround them with people with whom they're safe, people who only reward them. And you help them to go out for job interviews that are realistic. So if they're going to do some work, and maybe they're only going to work 10 hours a week, but still, it's a job. And it increases their sense of self-esteem. And if you do this in small enough steps, there are some people who learn from this. And this was one of those things that Bandura really tried to emphasize, is the tremendous growth that could take place in people if you were willing to teach them in very small incremental steps how to approach some problem. Now, otherwise, Bandura's theory hasn't really had a lot of impact in the clinical world. It's very complex, as you can see. What it has done for those people who want to study social interaction is it really has alerted us to the fact that your cognitive set and what is out there in the environment and how you perceive what is out there in the environment and how you then decide to act in terms of what's in the environment can have a tremendous impact on whether you're going to be successful or not successful. Okay, next we will move on and we will talk about two other trait theorists. So this takes care of our cognitive theorists. And as I say, if you want to stay at 12, we'll start another session. Otherwise, be here tomorrow and you'll get to hear about these people.